Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Lauren McCatton, and I work for the Office of Advancement at Colby College. I am the Associate Director of Engagement here, and I am so happy you could join us for the last of our webinar series for 2024. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. William L. Coleman. Dr. Coleman Oops, let me change my view here. Excuse me. Dr. Coleman is the Wyeth Foundation curator and director of the Andrew and Betsy Wyeth Study Center at the Brandywine Museum of Art in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. In addition to his work at the Brandywine, he oversees the Wyeth Foundation collections at the Farnsworth Art Museum in Rockland, Maine. A noted scholar and educator in the field of American art, Dr. Coleman has focused much of his research on the history of landscape painting in the United States. His recent projects include the nationally traveling exhibitions Andrew Wyeth at Kerner Farm, The Eye of the Earth, and Cross-Pollination, Heed, Coal, Church, and Our Contemporary Moment, both of which have brought new insights into the legacies of these iconic American artists. Dr. Coleman's deep connection to the Wyeth family and their work also extends to his role in a significant initiative involving the preservation of Allen Island and Benner Island. These islands, which played a central role in Andrew Wyeth's creative process, are now stewarded by Colby College as part of an effort to continue honoring the Wyeth legacy. This initiative represents a unique collaboration between Colby College, the Wyeth Foundation, and the Up East Foundation to ensure that these landscapes and their histories remain vital sources of inspiration and study for future generations. We are fortunate today to hear from Dr. Coleman, whose expertise and passion for American art and its landscapes continue to shape both scholarly discourse and public appreciation of these extraordinary works. Please join me in welcoming Dr. William L. Coleman.
Thanks for that very kind introduction, Lauren, and thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate this chance to share a kind of personal perspective on one of the many layers of these special environments that I hope that many friends of Colby will have the chance to visit at some point. I feel so lucky to be working in close partnership with Colby College and getting to spend a little more time out there in this incredible place that we think of as an immersive environment designed by Betsy James Wyeth. There are other talks in this series that go into other layers of the place, and as I understand it, my remit is to focus today on the art that came out of that place. So I'll say that up front. I won't be able to resist talking a little bit about the fascinating figure behind the scenes, Betsy Wyeth, who is at the center of an exhibition with which I'm collaborating with the Colby College Museum of Art for 2026, as well as colleagues at the Farnsworth Art Museum. And we hope that exhibition will travel nationwide. So stay tuned for more about that. Of course, this place has a long pre-Wyeth history. I hope that goes without saying. I hope that you've been able to learn a little bit about the Abenaki use of these islands as a summer fishing colony. You may have picked up some of the earlier settler colonial history, the mythological first Protestant service in the Americas by George Weymouth on Allen Island. There are a lot of layers to this place, and I feel very grateful to Colby College as somebody who is full-time focused on the Wyeth creative legacy for being such good stewards of this site. It's been a really interesting moment of transition, one of which friends of Colby should feel really proud. This iconic site in the history of global art now being used for education and enrichment and being generously shared with the world under the auspices of Colby. I'm grateful to Professor Whitney King, who I think I saw logged in here, for playing a key role in that, making legacy staff of the Wyeth family really feel a part of the Colby community, and countless other members of the Colby College staff and students, indeed, the island interns who've been working to tell the story of this special place. So I will dive into sharing some of the images, some of the works of art that came out of Allen and Benner Islands. I start there with a great image taken by Andrew and Betsy Wyeth's granddaughter, Victoria Wyeth. Maybe the last image of Andrew Wyeth on the dock on Benner Island before his death in early 2009. And at right, tempera painting that I'll come back to as my very final image here. So I'll say a little more about tempera. Rest assured, I'll come back to that crucial image that is kind of an encapsulation of what I say in my title was really a true creative partnership, a complicated, really rich place of exchange, design, creation, and indeed painting practice in a variety of media. So I do want to give you a little bit of history of the Wyeth family, this really interesting American story before we get to Allen and Benner Island. So very briefly, assuming no prior knowledge of this, I'll just explain the context from which I speak. My little Google Maps pin there on the right is on Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. And you get a sense of the unique geography there in one of those green patches outside the twin metropoli of Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware. It is not fully of either place. It is this kind of preserved rural enclave, not so far from these major I-95 corridor population centers, but does sometimes feel like a world apart. And this is the place that Andrew Wyeth was born as the son of the very influential and popular artist illustrator Newell Convers, or N.C. Wyeth. And it was a place to which Betsy James Wyeth came only with her marriage, a place that felt very foreign to her at first, but that she came to know deeply. At left, one of my favorite images of Andrew Wyeth at work, carrying a humble steel tackle box for fishing that is full of his painting materials, watercolor in this case, walking the coast of Maine, in this case, a family property in Port Clyde, about which more later. And we should say more about Betsy James Wyeth too. Even though she is explicitly not the focus of this talk, she's always in the picture. Really fascinating person who created this kind of new era for Wyeth World in many ways. She certainly is the primary designer of what you see on Allen and Benner Islands. And this slide is meant to tease things to come. The fact that she was raised in a really interesting creative place, the Roycroft Arts and Crafts Group in East Aurora, New York, of which her father was the art director. You see a painting of Betsy by her father at left. So long before she ever met Andrew Wyeth, she was already steeped in the arts and a really thoughtful, sophisticated consumer of the arts, designer, and her story goes deep. So you'll have to come and see our multi-sited exhibition in 2026 to learn more. I like this image at the center taken in the Chadds Ford southern pole of Wyeth World as kind of lady of the manor, the designer of a site called Brinton's Mill, which is one of her immersive environments close to home for me. And you get one little taste of her collecting interest there, ceramics at left. So she starts with really interesting works of adaptive reuse and environmental design in Pennsylvania, and then expands to this really fascinating lifelong practice in Maine. And the years are roughly 50-50. Half the year Pennsylvania, half the year Maine. Andrew Wyeth's lifetime output of some 11,000 works of art is also roughly 50% Maine work, 50% Pennsylvania. And the inside baseball of my strange line of work is that this incredible Wyeth Foundation collection, some 7,000 works of art, is stored in its state of creation. So two different offices, Brandywine and Farnsworth, with this amazing collection we're working to share with the world. And no small amount of that collection, as you'll see, whenever time you see the Wyeth Foundation for American Art in a credit line, that's the stuff we get to play with, we get to share with audiences. A lot of that material is from Allen and Benner. I thought I'd put on screen a useful map that will be a little hard to read on your screen, but I've given you a link where you can go deeper if you like. This is something that a colleague at the Brandywine made for an exhibition that is currently on view in Chadds Ford. So hopefully you see what we're doing here. We're focusing in. We've given you Pennsylvania, these two people independently, and now we're coming to the larger context of Maine. and you'll see at the bottom of your screen there, Allen and Benner. That will be the focus for the remainder of our time. So I wanted to fill in some of the other key sites. You who are connected to Colby probably know this general environment well, but let me just point out, if you can see my mouse here, Rockland, where the Farnsworth is, one site of Andrew Wyeth's painting practice, another pole, Waldoboro, there's some interesting painting there. But mostly we come to have this really tight focus, only about a 3 or 5 mile radius right around the town of Port Clyde, where a lifetime's work occurs. Port Clyde is home base, is the first pied-à-terre. N.C. Wyeth acquires a property known as Eight Bells, named after a Winslow Homer painting there in Port Clyde. The secret of that property is that it is where the electrical cable runs out to Allen and Benner. So there is a very direct link between Eight Bells and Allen and Benner. But there's a lot of interesting work that happens around Port Clyde. Wyeth learns to navigate the area waters and paints many of the surrounding islands, many other little villages in the area. And then, of course, the other peninsula, the Cushing Peninsula, is where you get the famous site, the Olson House, now a historic site under the management of the Farnsworth. And that was the world of the James family. So this is one of Betsy's many contributions to Andrew Wyeth's work. He gets all the spotlight, he gets all the fame and glory. She is a precondition for his practice in a tremendous way. And again, that story goes deep. She is the one who brings him to that iconic subject matter of the Olson House. I wanted to start with this one also to clarify that Allen and Benner is not where the story of this island practice it begins, and that is actually Southern Island. The first island that the Wyeths own outright is Southern, just off Tennant's Harbor, which they acquire in 1978. Allen comes quickly thereafter in 79, and Benner is quite a late project, 1990, with Betsy continuing to transform it until about 2010, where the project kind of winds down. So there's this increasing move offshore, a fascination with the romance of islands that I think many of us can share. They really get under our skin. I'm a lifelong Monhegan person, and that's what made me a Wyeth specialist. So just another 5 miles out to sea, you'll get that famous site for American art. So I feel that feeling that the Wyeths had, how these self-contained worlds are really evocative, really romantic, and come to speak deeply to Andrew Wyeth as subjects for painting. So if you want to see that map in greater detail, if you just go to the Brandywine Museum homepage and click to our current exhibition Up East, Andrew Wyeth in Maine, and then you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you'll see a high-res link where you can zoom into that map if you'd like. So let's dive into the islands in particular. I'm going to start with Benner, and then I'm going to conclude with Allen, which is reverse chronological order, but there's a reason for it. The final work comes out of Allen, so I do want to conclude there. Again, I know many of you have been there, but let me just briefly orient our audience here, looking back toward the mainland, back toward Port Clyde and Monhegan, across this small harbor farther out to sea. We're looking at this seemingly inevitable, seemingly always present romantic village of New England vernacular architecture. That we learn as we dig into the stories of this place, as we dig into the interpretation, the work, and the research that the island interns are doing, the stories of all these groups and educators that are coming out to the island. We're increasingly getting the memo that this is a created environment. It was not always this way. And you're already seeing the touches of Betsy James Wyeth. And so the pond in the foreground, the Orr House, an architectural design by Betsy, in no small part as subjects to be painted. And that's her own words. It is, again, complicated, and we're eager to take Betsy's practice seriously in its own right. We're doing that in this ongoing exhibition project I keep on talking about. But today, I want you to take in this environment, and then I'll share some of the paintings that came out of it. Lauren thought friends of Colby might find it interesting to hear just how widely dispersed images of the Colby Island campus have now become through Andrew Wyeth's paintings. So I brought you inside the Orr House. We're now looking exactly 180 degrees the opposite direction. We're looking out through this great window over the pond. And I thought I would start with this tempera painting. And this, you might be interested to see, is, as far as I know, currently on display at the White House. I will reserve further comment on recent events, but it has been really interesting to see Wyeth in the conversation with our seat of presidential power. There was a 1970s exhibition of Andrew Wyeth's work in the White House, and then in the 90s, this work was first on loan and then gifted to the White House Historical Association. So I should say a few words about tempera, even as we're just sort of drinking in this beautiful image and thinking about how Betsy crafted the subject that Andrew Wyeth was painting. What do we mean when we say egg tempera? Egg tempera is this medium that Andrew Wyeth becomes especially known for, which is kind of an outdated, archaic, anachronistic practice that has largely been superseded by the superior technology of ready-made oil and acrylic pigments in tubes ready to go by the time he's painting. For some strange reason that we can dig into, he makes a lifelong practice of using this very challenging painting method where you have to separate out the yolk from the white. You have to puncture the sac of the yolk and get just the liquid from the inside of the yolk sac. And then you mix it with distilled water, not tap water. It has to be distilled. And then you mix in mineral pigments, crushed up colorful stones to get your pigments that you're applying to canvas in these really fine layers. When it's done right, it gives you these incredible transparent surfaces where the act of making is able to disappear. You are able to be lulled into thinking that you're just looking through a window into another world. Of course, we're eager to emphasize the extent to which this highly original creative voice was a visionary in paint, was making really interesting and poetic choices, even as he often chose to paint very tightly and realistically. There are bold things happening behind the scenes, and we're coming to learn how deeply he was connected to contemporary abstract painting, believe it or not. So that's another deeper story for another day. But at this first starting point of about a dozen interesting paintings I'll share with you from the islands, let's just note that Andrew Wyeth is painting a subject that was designed for his brush, a created pond, created clear meadows, practically the exact view out a window that Betsy had designed on Benner Island. So this is an evidence of the kind of chicken or the egg nature of this creative partnership. Betsy was shaping the worlds that Andrew Wyeth painted. That subject, Jupiter, also gives us an excuse to talk about another extreme of Andrew Wyeth's practice that will not be the primary focus of my remarks today, which is his studies, his free and very personal practice of watercolor to capture ideas, generate ideas, and get a project started. You get a sense of where something like Jupiter comes from when you look at a work cataloged as a study for Jupiter in our collection. What has interested us about works like Scrub Spruce Study for Jupiter is the fact that he's capturing an interesting phenomenon of the marine spruce fir forest, this thing called flagging, where trees that are exposed to the harsh winds and weather of the coastal environment show changed patterns of growth, bare branches on one side, lush branches on the other. He's picking up on this fundamental fact of the forest ecosystem in his own work. And we think about him as a pretty sensitive inhabitant of the natural world, observing interconnected communities of plant life on the coast. And as that coast is changing with a rapidly warming Gulf of Maine, paintings like this one help us to understand a fixed moment in time that is under threat. Taking you back to the Orr House here, so you previously saw a view through that window. I'm now urging you to look again at this designed structure by Betsy James Wyeth. There was nothing of this kind previously here. We have her architectural drawings for it. She often works with an engineer to help make sure it's structurally sound, but this is the handiwork of Betsy Wyeth. And again, the house itself is not just a viewing apparatus, but a subject for painting, as is clear in a work like Airborne, now in the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, founded by the Walmart heiress and important collector Alice Walton. So one more piece of evidence of how this collection, how this place in Colby's stewardship has gone out to the world. We really love this one, and I'm hopeful that it will be on view in the Colby College Museum of Art's downtown Waterville Gallery as a part of our Big Betsy exhibition in 26. And I know my colleague Kendall DeBoer, Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Colby Museum, is working on that. So wish us luck. It would be lovely to bring some of these things home where they will have a new residence. You'll see these feathers, seagull feathers, blowing in the breeze. And one of the fundamental layers of this place was an engagement with the avian life of the islands. I know that that continues also in the Colby era, study of bird migration. And this was a major interest for Betsy. This is an experience that some of us might have had out there. You do get a sense of lost feathers billowing up in the breeze. It is not a completely invented scene, but the house and the pond are invented, are designed by Betsy just to serve as evocative, prototypically New England subject matter and imagined, perfected 19th century past that may have never existed. And this we think of as fundamental to her design language. Another structure on Benner, the Octagon, which Betsy conceived as a studio for Andrew Wyeth, did not end up feeling that comfortable as a studio. You can imagine feeling a little bit like a an animal in the zoo with visible and vulnerable all around when people are walking around on the island. And it does get to be a little bit like a greenhouse when the sun is at the right angle. So does not end up being primarily a creative space, but it is a beautiful, evocative building in its own right that inspires painting practice. This one in a private collection in Maryland is again a work in that medium of egg tempera. Over a lifetime, Wyeth makes just over 300 temperas, but over 9,000, maybe even more than 10,000 watercolors. Watercolor becomes the medium that expresses urgent inspiration, getting ideas down quickly, the spontaneity, improvisation before our very eyes. So frankly, the watercolors often speak to me even more than the temperas. The temperas are these austere, perfected, beautiful environments. The most famous of them, Christina's World in the Museum of Modern Art. As I said, the figure of the artist, the hand of the artist at work is able to recede. It becomes less about that subjectivity and more about a kind of poetry, a poem in paint, where we have this kind of surreal, visionary, evanescent world that is hard to grasp, and you get a sense of these layers in the land, and very often a sense of death latent in the landscape. There's a kind of a fundamental Gothic darkness in a lot of Wyeth's work. Another here is Ghosts in our collection. This is an example of a use of watercolor that Betsy called dry brush, where you quite literally squeeze most of the water off your watercolor brush and you're able to paint very tightly and precisely. This became one of his primary claims on the art market's attentions. The temperas command the highest price tags for sure, and then the dry brush a close second. And those free and abstract watercolors that I love so much are more of a well-kept secret that we're working to share with the world. You see Betsy herself at work in this space as a kind of studio with these presidential and historical figure busts as her company in that space, acting like kind of ghostly presences in the room. On to a structure known as the Wharf House. And this one actually does come to serve as Andrew Wyeth's primary creative space on Benner Island. He continues to go back and forth between the mainland and the islands. We think of the islands as primarily Betsy's world, as the cliche goes. There was a two-part article in Architectural Digest that called them that quite directly. Andrew Wyeth dips in and out, goes back to his favorite mainland subjects, the Cushing Peninsula, the land around Eight Bells and Port Clyde. But when he does come out, he's painting in this space with its large north window, the opposite side of this building, that characteristic structure of an artist studio for the steady light that comes from the north. And you see some of his pigments there still in place. So I hope you'll get a chance to visit that evocative space. I've mentioned the ways in which Wyeth's modernity and originality manifests, and it is very often not in the way the paint is applied to the canvas, as is the modernist claim of an artist like Jackson Pollock or Franz Klein, his fellow travelers, his direct contemporaries.
some of whom he has great friendships with and respect for. Wyeth's modernism is of a compositional geometric nature, and he makes these very strange compositions like Ship's Door, where you see him honing in on a really unexpected facet of that interior I've just shown you. We still have in place the little ship's model there. It's now moved to a different building on Allen, but we can cobble them back together here. The binoculars and the birds in the cage there, evoking that interest in the bird life of the islands and the ways in which these structures all served as kinds of viewing instruments, both for Betsy's interests and for Andrew's. So just wanted to give you that example of where the artwork was actually happening when he paints on the islands. This is a very famous subject that gets us into the topic of how Betsy Wyeth collected whole buildings and relocated them. This building appears in a famous tempera from a period when it was actually located in Cushing, back on the mainland, connected to the James family home. This is an old one-room schoolhouse that was first transplanted to the James family property known as Broad Cove Farm, where the tempera witching hour is made, and then later is relocated out to Betsy Wyeth's magnum opus of Allen and Benner Island. And you have a sense of that looking much the same way today. So I hope you'll get a chance to visit it now connected to the Orr House there. We dream of recreating this kind of environment as a part of the 2026 exhibition, thinking about the specific choices that Betsy Wyeth was making as a designer of immersive environments. The Hitchcock chairs that you see here are now over in the block house on Allen Island that we'll talk about a bit later. But the table remains, the candelabra remains. So we'll see if we can put the painting back in dialogue with the collected furniture and the thoughtfully designed spaces that are, again, a conscious choice. This muted color palette, the furniture that she gathers from distant antique dealers and a network of allies that is widespread across the Eastern Seaboard. She's bringing these composites together to make these perfected pasts that may have never truly existed. Bringing you to a different corner of Benner Island, a place that we think of as Betsy's Beach, where there's this charming sign, the cable bringing in electricity from 8 Bells. That cable that we understand was broken in that horrible winter storm early this year, a tough period for the staff working on the islands, and really kudos to them for coming through that difficult time. Long period, as I understand it, operating off a generator, but happily that connection has been restored, and we get a kick out of the Wyeth era sign warning people not to land on this tempting beach. Those cruisers of the Maine coast in the summer might be tempted to come ashore, but if you do, a dinosaur is going to come and chase you in your little canoe running for shelter. Something similar is in place at the Winslow Homer studio in Prout's Neck, where he's put up some sign warning about poisonous snakes and insects, if memory serves, trying to not get bothered while he's at work. So hold that image of Betsy's Beach in mind, and let me share the painting of that very title. Again, going back to watercolor, this is a lovely and little known one in the Wyeth Foundation collection. I hope it'll be a part of that upcoming exhibition as we try to read these artworks against the grain. We all are coming to know the Andrew Wyeth story, one of these blue chip names up in lights in the history of global art, but certainly in the art of the United States in particular, and the story of the other part of this creative environment has been less well known. Betsy is shaping that beach, and she's shaping the works that emerge from it. Another here now looking across sort of in the direction of Allen beyond and the village on Benner as a P-3 Orion subchaser flies low overhead. I remember the days not so long ago when you would see these planes with a characteristic antenna sticking out of their tail flying out of Brunswick Naval Air Station. My dad would tell stories of the Cold War and imagined Soviet subs just off the coast. And Wyeth had the experience of flying in one of these patrol planes of the coast and made this interesting image of an incident in which that plane, with Andrew Wyeth aboard, made a low pass over the islands. So let's go across to Allen, which may be the part of this place that is better known to most of you. it makes the traces of its own design and the labor that went into its making unmistakably clear. Most of all in this charismatic story, the sail loft, that I'll culminate with. But many other buildings on this site, the blockhouse designed by Betsy Wyeth, others pre-existing, restored, transplanted, a composite again, and the edge of a cleared area with some grazing in process as we prepare to recede into the dense forest. And I believe this is an image taken by Peter Ralston, who I think I saw logged in. I should always give credit. This was a revelatory image from a presentation that Peter gave in the sail loft not so long ago about his role alongside colleague Philip Conkling in the transformation of the islands on Betsy's watch. So as ever, that beloved Maine photographer who had a really important relationship with the Wyeths captures this incredible image looking across toward Betsy, bringing it all together with that lovely rain sweeping in, which reminds me of the McCloskey Time of Wonder that I have been reading to my little girl. So great overarching view of this place. Let's zoom into one of the best known images made on Allen Island. This is currently on view at the Brandywine. We love it so much that we put it in our kind of entry mural at the Wyeth Study Center in Chadds Ford, the painting known as Pentecost. And this is classic Andrew Wyeth. It is very evocative and mysterious and strange, and it turns out to have a really mournful story behind it. But on its surface, just an incredibly beautiful, technically accomplished depiction of nets drying on these high booms on Allen Island, evoking in the process this really interesting history of support for the working waterfront and the workers of mid-coast Maine that continues in the Colby era. We've been really gratified to see that local watermen are allowed to store traps on the big pier on Allen. And that began on Betsy's watch. That began also with her role in the founding of the Island Institute, supporting a sustainable marine economy. And in their period, operations like these are in process on the islands, and accidentally in the process giving Andrew Wyeth this gauzy effect to try to capture in both tempera, and we should emphasize graphite. Many of these fine gray lines here are just pencil. So it's a lovely thing. You might, if you know Wyeth at all, you might think about things like Wind from the Sea, these kind of ghostly images where you feel this motion, you feel this presence of perhaps the supernatural. The story behind this one is that these nets made him think about a sad recent incident in which a woman had drowned not far from Allen Island. So this is an artist who is thinking about the presence of death in life and this darkness latent in the landscape. And beautiful works like these emerge from that really unique way of looking. The blockhouse, Betsy Wyeth design, fascinating structure at the center of the Allen Island Village, another of these designed ponds by Betsy Wyeth. And it too inspires paintings by Andrew Wyeth, like this lovely watercolor swallowtail in a California collection, again emphasizing the national dispersal of the island campus, these lovely irises in the foreground. That I had the chance to go up to that evocative cupola on my most recent visit in September, and gives you a lovely view out over the small harbor and back toward Port Clyde. Taking you into the forest on Allen Island and to this stand of old growth birch trees that are one of the famous landmarks of Allen Island, with this lovely trails network. I hope some of you might have had the chance to walk and wander most of the island left wild with this network of trails to explore. But that sense of natural history, these trees that had stood witness to centuries, also called out to Andrew Wyeth in the making of the more abstract and free watercolor virgin birch, honing in on that dappled light effect on their trunks and the infinite complexity of the little fern fronds overlapping them in the shadows, light peeking through the trees. So classic Wyeth, a really dense, full, large format watercolor that does paint representational subject matter. This is not abstract expressionism, but he is finding a lane all his own in the 20th and 21st century art world. That has been complicated. There's this really interesting afterlife of Andrew Wyeth's work that we could talk about more in the questions if you're interested. It's something I think a lot about in my line of work. There has been consistent general audience fascination with Wyeth and a lot of love from the general public, and the tastemakers and gatekeepers in art galleries and in academic departments of art history have not always been convinced. I think that has changed. There was a period where he was considered too representational to be fully serious, too popular to be important. And I think the stakes have really shifted. And just as artists like Edward Hopper have become unproblematically a part of the canon alongside prickly abstraction, so is there a really general sense that what happened on Allen and Benner Island matters to the world. And we are getting inquiries from all over the world for loans of works like these. Exhibitions are percolating, publications are growing. And I'm speaking to the next generation of art historians coming out of academic departments. And I hear what I'd hope to hear, which is everybody recognizes this stuff is essential and important and really interesting alongside a lot of other creative stories. So that's just where we should be. And we're not just trying to be a shrine to the Wyeths, but to ask good questions, understand why the work looks the way it does, share it with others, put it in dialogue with other artists, and see what happens. Personal snap out toward beloved Monhegan Island, the place that made me an art historian, from the southern tip of Allen Island. I wonder if some of you might have seen this great Allen Island painting now in the nationally touring Bank of America collection. It's been on the road for years and years. I don't know where exactly the show has landed now. I think it's in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. But you can see this great work of egg tempera showing that view out from the tip of Allen toward that characteristic whale-like shape of Monhegan and Manana Islands there. Coming finally as my last case study before leaving time for questions. So please do think of any. Feel free to put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll be happy to chat and to share more. As I've said numerous times here, this is the tip of an iceberg. There's a whole staff who are devoted to really trying to understand this complicated, really rich legacy in the history of American art. This creative partnership that was so unusually rooted in place. A story of an art that was so loved in its own time that the Wyeths had the resources to travel anywhere, paint and inhabit any environment, but they chose to focus so deeply on just this kind of 5-mile radius around Port Clyde and this 5-mile radius around Chadds Ford. So there's a lot there. The islands are the ultimate realization of this, and the sail loft is the kind of culmination of this as I think about it. This project in which Betsy transplanted a historic structure for the making of sails 5 miles out to sea to serve as the center of this village of romantic New England evocation, and indeed to serve as a kind of museum there, fisherman's museum, the dories and apparatus, and some archaeological findings on the islands there. And then on the second floor, a kind of sail loft museum. We said our topic here would be the art of the islands. How interesting that in addition to seeking to design subjects and buildings that Andrew Wyeth would find productive for his brush, Betsy Wyeth is also overseeing an exhibition practice and bringing the work back to the islands, exhibiting them annually on the second floor of the sail loft, which is now a very useful meeting space. The Wyeth Foundation has its annual meeting up there. Maybe you've been out for some other Colby event, but try to picture it in that sail loft museum usage full of many of the paintings I've shared with you today. You might be familiar of the great film Fitzcarraldo by Werner Herzog. I keep on thinking of that as an example of this quixotic labor of having a disassembled building transported out to sea, not unlike taking a steamship through the Amazon in that film, with this single-minded focus against all odds, no matter the expense, no matter what naysayers on the mainland might have said about, quote, Betsy's folly, but fixated on this vision that maybe for a time only she could see, and also seeing how it would inspire Andrew Wyeth's work. So let's go to the final tempera, Goodbye. We're very fortunate again to have this in the Wyeth Foundation collection. Unfortunately, to see this one, you're going to have to come to the Farnsworth because it is very fragile. As a part of its lateness, the materials didn't bind together as well as we might have liked. Some of the technical execution was not as secure as earlier in Andrew Wyeth's career. But the subject remains a painting titled Goodbye that is a kind of a farewell to Betsy and to all of us, using that image of the sail loft as a metonym for his lifelong creative partner. And you have that lovely image of the friendship sloop, the characteristic working sailboat of these waters heading just out of frame to the left. So there our story ends, and there are literally thousands of other, mostly watercolors, some drawings, and I probably even missed a tempera or two that have come out of the island campus as it is now. I hope you'll carry these images in mind. It is a really rich story among the many others beckoning for your attention on the island campus. It doesn't need to be all about Wyeth all the time, but we do hope that people who visit this place, when you see images of it in your alumni magazine, that you will think of this incredible trust, this historic artists environment, and a site of a really unique creative partnership that is now in the care of Colby College. And I will end there and would be happy to take any questions. Let's see if we got any. How long does egg tempera last? Do you have to mix it on each day of painting? Asked Jan Adams. It is a tricky one, and you really do have to make it every single day when you're working with it. We have many of the materials he was using. The Andrew Wyeth studio down in Chadds Ford is staged in the way it was on the day he last used it. As we understand it, he would go to our beloved regional convenience store, Wawa, and pick up ordinary white eggs there, and you have to mix it every single day. It's certainly no good on the second day. And as you heard in the case of Goodbye, if you don't get the mixture just right, bad stuff happens. So yeah, some of these temperas are very fragile. They really don't like vibration. They really don't like rapid humidity changes. So we get to be very good friends with the mad scientists that are art conservators. Another talk one could have on another day. Really fascinating experts who really understand the chemistry of art as well as the art history of objects and help us to take care of these things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Will. And thank you so much for generously sharing your time, knowledge, and personal stories with us. We're so grateful for your partnership with Colby College. Another question that just came through is from Doug Sacra. He shares, is Colby running any painting classes out on the island for alumni? So I can go ahead and answer that question. So the island programming for the 2025 season is now in its planning and preparation stages. And I am the person who would be coordinating those efforts. I can tell you that we have a number of opportunities that we hope to be offering for alumni next year, one of which may include some opportunities for an artistic experience and a plein air type of environment. Thank you for asking that. Mary Miller asks, was Goodbye Andrew's last painting?
It was his last egg tempera painting, but it was not his last painting. And I have this kind of existential and urgent need in my line of work to make people take the watercolors equally seriously. The temperas are what people know best. They are really beloved for good reason. They're the ones that command eye-watering sums on the art market. But you have this really interesting other extreme of his practice, this master of two very different time scales of art, the weeks or even months sometimes of work to make a tempera versus this urgent 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours to capture a watercolor. So there are watercolors that come after goodbye, that medium that is a lot less physically demanding as well as less time demanding, less time intensive. He's able to keep on practicing right to the very end in early 2009.
Thank you. We have some more questions coming in. One is from Molly Constable. Molly asks, she would love to know more about Betsy's symbol, this circular six-petaled symbol etched in places like the bench in the Orr House dining room.
Darn it, I'm going to blank on this. I have heard my colleague Amy Morey, who gave a previous talk in this series, talk a little bit about that. It is a recurrent folk motif. It is something that she picked up from historic American material culture that does recur in numerous places, but I can't tell you much more about it. I think it might have been originally a Pennsylvania German motif, but I'll have to get back to you on that. I meant to include also on my last slide, if anybody has any burning follow-up questions like that one, you're most welcome to reach out to our general office contact address across 2 states, Wyeth Study Center at brandywine.org. And there'll be somebody who will remember the answer to that very good question.
Wonderful, wonderful. Kathy Polly asks, or rather, thanks you for the presentation. Most interesting. Another question that came along is, will there be a publication and catalog for the 2026 exhibition at the Colby Museum of Art?
Yes, indeed. We are deep in dialogue with the wonderful publisher Rizzoli Electa. We're going to have to race to the finish. We have to get all of our content in pretty early in 2025, but it will be a big, beautiful, lavishly illustrated Rizzoli Electa book. We already know some of its specs in pretty intimate detail, and one little touch for those of us who really love Betsy James Wyeth as a designer is that instead of your standard exhibition catalog that is a vertical format, this will be a wider than it is tall book. This is very inside baseball, but among Betsy's many legacies is writing and making a lot of really interesting books. And hers often preferred that very wide format. So it's going to be a little subliminal shout out to Betsy's own publishing endeavors, essays from Colby's own Kendall DeBoer, the Farnsworths, Francesca Soriano from yours truly, and then significant numbers, something like 20 of the short, quick hit perspectives from insiders and experts in parts of the environmental design legacy of Betsy James Wyeth. And I see one expert on the line. I shouted out the wonderful Peter Ralston when I borrowed one of his photographs without asking from that incredible lecture that Colby should really have him reprise at some point. Everybody should go look at Peter Ralston's work in his cool gallery in Rockport. And this fellow traveler of the Wyeths is able to fill in a little bit of detail there on that intriguing motif in the Witching Hour painting. And his recollection is that it was a protractor exercise from the time when that was a one-room schoolhouse. I think that Amy Morey told me that it occurs also in some other place, that there's this kind of these stars that she finds in multiple places come to be a leitmotif. So there is a larger story there, but I can't quite remember what it is. Jan asks, is the surface of a tempera painting protected in any way? Our practice for exhibiting temperas is that the conservators really want us always to have them under really state-of-the-art UV protective glass. Unfortunately, you probably won't be able to see too many temperas ever again without any barrier between you and the paint surface because they are so potentially sensitive to vibration and contact, one little misplaced elbow, and we've really got to make
major problem. So we feel a lot better having them under this state-of-the-art glass that is incredibly expensive, but makes the glare almost completely disappear. And in one interesting ongoing project, we're building what we call a microclimate for one especially sensitive large format tempera, not shown here, one of his Pennsylvania works. We are in a matter of weeks going to build one of the largest microclimates around to stabilize the humidity of this tempera inside that glass and a kind of aluminum backing. Very complicated, has required about 2 or 3 months of study and labor and consultation with people at the National Gallery who have done this before. But that's the sort of thing we have to get into because these temperas are so important to the world and because they really do need our TLC.
Wonderful. Alec Petty asks, what is the best way and time to visit the islands as a Colby student and or parent? I'd be happy to answer that question as well. So through the Office of Advancement, we run a series of events throughout the summer where we bring alumni, families, parents, friends of the college to the islands. And we have opportunities for small groups to go up to 14 people or much larger groups up to 70 people. This past summer, we brought groups out during reunion weekend and homecoming weekend, as well as we ran a puffin cruise in July that was quite popular, actually our largest group. And we'll be hosting similar events in the future. I would be happy to share the link to the past events that occurred in terms of island campus programming. And as I said earlier, the programming for next summer will be published later on this year. Right now, it's still in the planning stages, but certainly the season of the island campus runs from May to early October. So advancement runs trips to the island throughout those months. And there are other opportunities for students to visit the island throughout the course of the season that they are here on campus. There are many classes that choose to spend time on the islands, maybe writing classes, painting classes, and all professors and faculty are invited to utilize the island campus and bring students out there. Great question, and thank you for asking.
Your answer gave me long enough to refresh my memory on another good question here from Hannah Blake. The work of our attendee, Peter Ralston and Philip Conkling, is a wonderful resource for understanding the islands of the Gulf of Maine, the archipelago of Maine, but one in particular that I would highlight for a longer history of these places is called Islands of the Mid-Maine Coast, Muscongas Bay and Monhegan Island by Charles B. McLean, and that is available on Amazon and a few other places. That one's now out of print, but yes, we will get into it a bit in the 2026 catalog. It will not be the final word on the topic. Were there cultural landscape studies completed? I'm not aware of one, but there was substantial professional archaeology as well as botanical study of the islands. I haven't seen one comprehensive cultural landscape report. Maybe Professor Whitney King can jump in and advise otherwise. If Professor King, if you have any insight on that, I think I saw you on the line earlier.
And I just provided the link in the chat to the site that contains the list that Advancement ran for Colby community members, alumni alike, this past year.
Can we recommend any books focused on Betsy? Ours will be the first. We do very much hope that there will be a serious general audience biography of Betsy, and that is something that we're working hard on right now. Looking for just the right person to go deep. Thank you, Professor King, for adding that. If you go to the Island Campus webpage, you can find more details on the landscape and its history. Yeah, we would really love to see a dedicated book about Betsy. Our book can only be about her creative and design life, and there are many other lives here. Fascinating businesswoman, and crafted a kind of brand. She is a really interesting power behind the throne, and there's all this evidence of a kind of a secret society of artists' wives who were in dialogue in this 20th century art world. Joe Hopper, Josephine Nivison Hopper, is another really interesting example. And we have very specific and clear documentation of a transfer of knowledge between Joe Hopper and Betsy Wyeth and other artist wives. Reginald Marsh's wife, whose name escapes me, writing to Joe Hopper to share ideas. So there's this kind of continuous thread that has been difficult to see. It's a really rich story that we'll start untangling, but there's a lot more to say there.
Will, I'm curious to ask, with the structures, we see this pattern of Betsy desiring to bring structures from the mainland to the islands. Are you able to talk a little bit about maybe perhaps where the inspiration for that came from and
Yeah,
shed a little bit more light on that? I think
yeah,
that's
that's
part
something
of what makes.
we've been talking a lot about that. You've given me a nice softball over the middle of the plate because this was the focus of a talk I gave at a conference just a couple of weeks ago. In each of her polls, there are some really interesting precedents for the way the mid 20th century was starting to think about the historic built environment. She was not the only one starting to recognize that old vernacular, that is not architect designed, buildings, ordinary people's building practices were being undervalued and were being lost. And just down the road in Pennsylvania, we have one key example, which is the Winterthur Museum Garden and Library. That is mostly a story about preserving whole interiors, not so much about transporting exterior structure, but taking really astonishing intact fabric of other buildings out of previous contexts and bringing them back together to this created museum in northern Delaware. The other one that often comes up in this context is Electra Havemeyer Webb's Shelburne Museum outside Burlington, Vermont, where you see her doing something uncannily similar with buildings that even look pretty similar. New England vernacular structures transplanted to an open meadow on the shore of Lake Champlain. And we know the Wyeths were really directly engaged with the Shelburne project because they sold an Andrew Wyeth painting called Soaring to Electra Havemeyer Webb. And then there's what Henry Ford is up to in Dearborn, Colonial Williamsburg, the Rockefellers. So there are some other interesting fellow travelers who are doing something along similar lines. I don't think that Betsy's impulse was purely historic preservationist. She had a more creative and free relationship to these old buildings, and it purposely pulls the wool over our eyes, what is old and what is new. It is meant to blend together and it is meant to be indistinguishable. So it forces us to kind of read it against the grain and to think about how she was making something all her own.
Thank you. We have another question. Is there a winter life on the islands? Did the Wyeths spend any winters in Maine, or summer or fall only?
Like maybe you or others from the Colby site can speak to what happens on the islands now in the winter. I can speak to the past. It was largely a summer practice. There are very few exceptions. Winter trips for one particular reason, like the funeral of Wyeth's key inspiration, Christina Olson, happened to fall in the winter, so he does go up in that period. Those few exceptions prove a wider rule that there is this incredible focus over a long and productive career on Pennsylvania in the fall and winter, Maine in the spring and summer.
Wonderful. And I'll add on to how the campus is utilized throughout the winter months as far as Colby College is concerned. So outside of the open season from May to October, the only folks that go onto the island in the winter months are researchers from the campus. And as well as the stewards of the island who maintain the island and ensure that all of the structures are safe and well kept and things of that sort. But excellent question. Thank you for asking. We just received another question from Peter Ralston. Jamie has, of course, spent a lot of time on several Maine islands in the winter, Southern and Monhegan Island. Not so much a question, but thank you so much for that anecdote. Absolutely. Thank you, Peter, for jumping in there.
Jimmy is another really interesting part of the story. A talk for another day. He is among those living voices who can help us understand the history of Allen and Benner. We understand he was the one who first put this bug in his mom's ear. Hey, this Allen Island, nearly the size of Monhegan, or even larger than Monhegan, is for sale. You should really think about it. So he's
Really?
devil on her shoulder, urging her to think about an expanding island empire. And yes, he has had a very different relationship with the Maine environment. That's been very inspiring to me as somebody who loves Monhegan. He's really gone deep on Monhegan Island as well as that beautiful southern island that he's made his own. It was first Betsy's, some really interesting traces of Betsy's design, but made it something altogether new. And were
And
there
thank you
any
so much for,
buildings? Yeah, were there buildings on these two islands originally? Yes, indeed, just a few. And our commenter, Peter Ralston, is the one who has taught me most about that. There are these incredible surviving images, some of which we'll hope to reproduce in this exhibition catalog. I think it's fair to say pretty rundown, pretty ramshackle, very simple fishermen's shacks, and not many of them. And also picture much more dense vegetation, trees right up to the water edge. So there was a conscious choice to bring back the second growth forest to a 19th century state of clearing and grazing, that widespread practice in the archipelago of Maine of grazing animals on islands, because you don't need a fence. They're not going to go anywhere. It's kind of a natural fit for grazing. So she is constantly consciously choosing a period of significance, as we say in historic preservation, that would have had a more open landscape.
thank you so much for joining us. We could not be more grateful for you to come and learn and continue to learn about the amazing relationship between Colby College as well as its partners in American art. William, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your partnership and look forward to many more conversations and the exhibition you mentioned in 2026, the Colby Art Museum.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Lauren.
you
Thanks
all.
for joining. Yeah, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and take good care.